What up, everyone? Welcome to this session of Real Archaeology. I'm really excited to be able to talk to you today about some factual entertainment about a place very special to me called Rapa Nui or Easter Island. But I think we have to thank all of the organizers and graphic designers and webmasters and producers and everyone watching at home. It gives me hope that there's people interested in how cool archaeology really is compared to some of the sensationalism that gets put on TVs and reels. So I'm really excited to have this chance today to be with you and talk to you about a topic I absolutely love. This really started out about 2 months ago or so. I had the chance to film a short video with Dr. Flint Dibble, who has sort of become a paramount figure in the battle against pseudoarchaeology and the misinterpretation of the ancestors. And luckily, when I was a grad student at the University of Auckland, his dad was one of my professors for one of the courses that we had about theory and practice in archaeology. So after I saw Flint's work and his crusade to show how important our work really is, I approached him and we filmed the stones of Rapa Nui. And you can find that video on my Illinois Simpson Archaeology playlist or on Flint's channel as well. They're both there. Please watch it. It'll give you a good background to some of the archaeology at the moment. But with this presentation, I sort of wanted to discuss a little bit more about the classic archaeology of Rapa Nui and to provide some insight of my life of living there for almost 25 years of working on the island and give you information that is empirical, that comes from myself. So I just, as a quick introduction, I decided to name this lecture "Walking with Giants: Real Rapa Nui on Real Archaeology." And my official title is Dr. Dale F. Simpson Jr. I'm a registered professional archaeologist. My job title is a senior scientific specialist with the Illinois State Archaeological Survey, which is out of the Prairie Research Institute at the University of Illinois. I'm also an adjunct instructor at the College of DuPage in Glen Ellyn, Illinois. I've been teaching there now for 15 years. I'm a board member for the Chicago Archaeological Society and the Illinois Association for Advancement of Archaeology. That's where I edit Illinois Antiquity. And then my two passion projects, though, are working as the director for Illinois Simpson Archaeology, a sort of play on Indiana Jones, and Rapa Nui Geochemical Project. So I've basically put all of these topics together in multiple videos I have on my channel. But today I just wanted to talk about my favorite place in the world, which is Easter Island. I had the chance to go there in 2001 on a field school with the University of Hawaii. This was led by the eminent professor, Dr. Terry Hunt. And we spent 1 month on the island, and it completely changed my life. So if you're an undergraduate looking at this, or you're interested in going to archaeology, go on a field school, go somewhere else to challenge you. Sometimes good archaeology is done in your home state, but going out and seeing the world will definitely open your horizons and let you better understand the archaeological record. So that was in 2001. And now in 2025, I've done a variety of things that deal with the island, from being on TV shows to working with Nordic Track and iFit to create exercise videos on the island that people follow along. I've been on a variety of shows that highlight different artifacts, including from the island, or just documentaries about Rapa Nui. We did one for a French TV channel, which was quite cool. I believe next year I'll appear on History's Greatest Mysteries with Morpheus. So that was quite cool to talk about Rapa Nui and the current situation of the state of knowledge. But it's really being on the island with the people, the living people. So the first sort of lesson I can give you is that the Rapa Nui people are alive and well, and they're strong. Their language is still alive, their culture, their music. They survived COVID quite well, and now they've opened back up for tourism. So I'm hoping maybe after some of you watching this, you find yourself on a flight from Miami to Santiago, Chile, and then from Chile over to Rapa Nui, and you can see the magic of this place. I also have more academic channels besides the YouTube. I have a lot of videos that deal with a lot of different topics in archaeology, mostly about Rapa Nui. I'm hoping with this video I start sort of launching into other topics and smaller, shorter reels that I can use with my classes. But a good way to find solid information is to go to places like ResearchGate and academia. These are pages that you can usually download articles that are peer reviewed. And that's a good thing too, because sometimes you just get them for free. I mean, if you email an author and say, hey, I'm really interested in your paper, you're going to make them so excited. They're going to be like, yes, someone wants to read my work. And then they can email your paper to you and you can have that without a paywall. So it's one way to get around the system. And a lot of times, you can make contact with scientists. And, when people contact me, I give them my article or, a little sentence of something they're interested in, and maybe that helps someone along. So I think that's the first thing that you should do if you're not, is become a part of some of these sort of social media academic pages and take advantage of the information that's there. Now, when I first say Rapa Nui or Easter Island, I get a variety of responses. One is, oh, that's the island that they cut down all the trees and killed themselves. One is, or another would be, oh, that's where the aliens first landed on planet Earth. Uh, or, oh, that's where the Easter Bunny comes from. And if you sample the variety of TV and media and cartoons and reels and TV shows, I think they do a piss poor job of representing the Rapa Nui well. In some regards, even disrespectful, like the classic night at the museum, dum dum one gum gum. Basically we laugh because it's writing, but that's someone's ancestor right there. That would be like if someone did that to George Washington or Abraham Lincoln and treated a great figure like that. Maybe some of you know about Tor Heyerdahl and Kon-Tiki and his and Tor Heyerdahl's work to believe people from South America came to Rapa Nui, or Jared Diamond's very synthesizing book called Collapse, that he basically said the island collapsed and everyone died. All of these things that I'm showing you right now are completely incorrect. There's not one story that's on this board that is actually a true representation of Rapa Nui. And now we have other individuals that are grabbing hold of Rapa Nui and using them to make up stories, to invalidate the Rapa Nui, to not give them the respect and really prestige that they deserve. And I just got done watching this 8-minute clip and I threw up 800 times. Just the inaccuracies, just the lies that were told, and the jumping of from very small bits of evidence to macro interpretations. And a real reason why these are done is mostly like a journalist would. They're not there for the long term. They don't do empirical work. They don't do the research. They don't live on an island and do the research for 20 years. They go there for 2 weeks, they get their story, and then they go. For me, I've been on that island for so long, I'm still looking for answers. I'm still trying to get a more complete narrative together. And that's one thing that I want to highlight for you today. So this picture right here worries me because I wonder, what the world, the millions of viewers that are going to watch this, they're going to listen to someone who has little background in not only oceanic and Pacific archaeology, but also Polynesia and Pacific culture. And this particular place was chosen, and the information that was used was made to fit a narrative, and not to test hypothesis or use the scientific method. Um, my colleague and I, Christian Moreno Pacarati, we are creating a response to um, sort of Hancock's work on the island. We're hoping to present an article for Sapiens and then also have some more discussion. So stay tuned to this channel, and we'll go toe to toe with someone who seems to be allergic to evidence. To start this story, though, I want to say all of us are connected to moai every day. Every day you pick up a phone and you text someone, you have a moai. So I challenge you, take a look at your phone after this chat, and take a look at what moai represents you on your phone. I'm a Samsung dude, so I really enjoy the Samsung right here. This moai looks pretty tight, long ears. He's got the little grass from Rano Raraku. And then the other ways that these big groups identify the moai, which is a very potent symbol. Now, what did they do down here with the old Bob Marley moai? I'm not too sure. Don't ask me. I think that's HTC who did that one, but I'm not too sure. But all of these are very potent and powerful symbols, so strong that you can show that symbol, and most people will say, oh, that's an Easter Island head, or that's a moai, which is the proper term. And I just think that with these statues, although we find them throughout Polynesia, these moai, they're found on one small island the size of Washington, D.C., but they're found all over the world. And if the aliens are watching, I'm sure even they would know what a moai is. To tell the story, we got to go a little back. We got to think about how people have moved through the Pacific. Most of you will know the tripartite of Polynesia, Micronesia, Melanesia. These are very colonial terms. They don't do justice of representing the diversity that we have in the Pacific. So I tend to stray away from those. What we do use in Pacific archaeology are terms called near Oceania and remote Oceania, and these represent the migrations that have happened in the Pacific and basically how far people made it out in the Pacific. We organize this migration in three pushes. The first is sort of the Pleistocene. So this is going to be before the Holocene, that will say 10,000 years ago, when people have been moving out of Africa for more than 100,000 years, and they start to move themselves through more tropical environments. There might have been radical sea level changes with sea levels very low and letting people populate into island Southeast Asia, and then finally making it into Papua New Guinea and Australia. So this migration is very important because some of these groups that make it in Australia and continue to live there become some of the world's longest continuous culture. Also in Papua New Guinea, you have almost a fourth of the world's languages. There's 7,000 languages, and almost 1,000 are in Papua New Guinea themselves. So it's quite interesting. You'll see that this main pulse basically makes it to the end of the Solomon Islands, and then we see later in the time, some 26,000 years later, a new group of individuals and a new cultural complex called Lapita. And they start to make their way into areas where people had already lived in the Pacific and in sort of the Bismarck Archipelago, and then into new areas that no humans had been to. But they too sort of run out of steam, or there's interpretations on what happens to Lapita. They ultimately become Polynesians, or what we would call the Maohi. The Maohi is a term that the Rapa Nui and their brothers and sisters from New Zealand and Hawaii and Tahiti, this is their identity of what they call themselves. And some would argue the Maohi world or culture was the largest, most geographically dispersed culture in the world up till today. And you still have Polynesian people or Maohi people living all throughout the world. So with this general flow, we see Rapa Nui and Hawaii and New Zealand colonized at the end of this push. And then what we really see is groups from New Zealand making it all the way to South America. There they pick up the sweet potato and bottle gourd. They probably touch in other areas of South America, intermixing with cultures that are already there and making their way back into the Pacific. So it's an unbelievable story. So when you see the movie Moana, Disney's favorite famous movie, where there's going to be a Moana 2, although there's issues of cultural appropriation and merging all of Polynesians into one island, what they did very well was to highlight how these groups move through the Pacific through their navigation ability. And there's the scene where Moana's leading this almost armada of boats of different sizes and different techniques, and that was very much the case. These Polynesians were probably some of the best seafarers humans have ever seen. And in fact, that's why groups like NASA work with Polynesian seafarers to think about how the stars are laid out. How do you stay in a ship for a month, 2 months? How do you have the songs and the stories to keep you going? So I very much do like how Moana highlights this great navigation of these Maohi folks. Now, more tangible that archaeologists study would be the monumental architecture, Maohi architecture, and they're usually stone platforms and walls and terraces, and these are found all throughout Polynesia and Maohi territory. Probably the most famous down here is Marae Tapu Tapu Atea, which some believe was sort of the capital of the Maohi, and all Polynesian chiefs would go there to pay offering and maybe have marriage ceremonies and communicate. And then this motif of building ahu or marae or heao, there's different names that are used, but the structures are very much the same. And at the heart of it all is stone, usually volcanic basalt stone. And these islands provided exactly what they would need. So there's no metal in Polynesia. They never used any type of metallurgy, but they were the masters of the stone. And one other thing that they built out of stone were statues. Now, Rapa Nui is quite famous for its moai, but it's not the only island that carves statues. You'll probably be more familiar with the tiki out of Hawaii that's sometimes carved from wood. But we have a variety of stone statues that come from almost all corners of Polynesia, of the Maohi territory. It's just on Rapa Nui, it seemed it had some of the best stone types. I have argued in other publication that Rapa Nui was one of the most geologically diverse islands in Polynesia. And because of that, these master carvers that had spent hundreds of years refining their art, once they got to Rapa Nui, they were ready to be the creme de la creme. And they definitely carved some of the most beautiful statues that we do see of size and so forth. Now, the question then becomes, where did the Rapa Nui people come from? And the simple answer is the interaction sphere of Mangareva, Henderson, and Pitcairn. So when I started my PhD, I was interested in sourcing studies and how you can look at stone tools, identify the chemicals of the source of where the stone tool was made, and then if someone moved that stone tool to a new island or a different part of an island, we wanted to trace that. And we started to do that with we can do that with our technology. Well, my advisor, now Professor Emeritus Marshall Weisler, he had worked in this area of Mangareva, Henderson, and Pitcairn. And what he had seen is that for some 400-500 years, these groups were interacting, these islands were interacting because not every island has what the other island needs to survive. In short, not every island can be self-sustainable. They actually needed contact. So one island was very rich in, for example, crops. Another island had a lot of basalt stone. Another one had obsidian. All of the resources were sort of spread out. But for 500 years, using that navigation, using that knowledge of stone, they sort of move themselves and resources all throughout this interaction sphere. So to become Rapa Nui, they had to interact. And that is something that we're going to talk about is the importance of interaction on Rapa Nui as we see it. We'll see a lot of these tools called adzes, ADZE, which is sort of a four-sided axe, is a way you can think about it. These are usually made of fine-grained basalt, and that's what I did my PhD on the toki, on Rapa Nui they're called, that used to carve the statues. But one little statue on the Pitcairn that we have, the hands, the head sort of missing, but I have identical statues like this on Rapa Nui. And it's showing that connection of being able to make the stone tools out of hard basalt, then carve softer stone to make statues that represent the ancestors. And from this interaction sphere, we think maybe around anywhere from 1,000 to 12,000, excuse me, well, 1,000 to 1,200 CE, current era, or AD, Rapa Nui was colonized by human beings. So it's basically, we know Native Americans have been in the United States for, maybe 20,000 years. By time people got to Rapa Nui, Columbus would only be coming to the New World 292 years later. So the Rapa Nui people are still navigating at that level, and they come up to Easter Island. Isla de Pascua is because on the 5th of April in 1722, a Dutch navigator named Jacob Roggeveen came to the island. He said, "Oh, well, today's Easter. Well, that's an island. Let's just call it Easter Island." Pretty lazy in the naming. The island is sometimes known as Rapa Nui, which can mean big paddle. There's also a smaller island called Rapa Iti that's in the Austral archipelago and maybe has some relationship to it being a bigger island. The islanders sometimes call their place Te Pito Te Henua, which means the belly button of the world. And it's sort of an interesting idea that how sacred the belly button is, because that's what gives life to the next generation. That's what passed on mana. And perhaps this was an island that was full of mana and life in continuing the story of Maohi exploration. In short, the island is the size of Washington, D.C. The main village is all right here called Hangaroa. There's maybe 8,000 people that live on the island after COVID. And it looks pretty denuded of trees, except there's the big parcel of eucalyptus in the center and some areas that have been reforested through time. But you'll see a very volcanic island, a very high volcanic island. Now, what's really interesting is, although we think there's so much mystery about Rapa Nui, it is very well researched. There are thousands of publications about the island and books and movies and interviews. And definitely in the last 20 years, we've picked up the pace on scientific publication, and we've really done the best we can with physical, genetic, linguistic, information to tell the story of the Rapa Nui. What we have difficulty with is there's a fragmented oral tradition. And although the language is still spoken on the island today, it has a lot of mixing from Mangarevan language. And then as well, because Chile annexed the island in 1888, there's a lot of code switching and sort of a hybridity of language, not to mention the French, the English, and other cultures that have come there. But there is, when you talk with the elders, there is a set language, everything from numbers, days, moon cycles, fish cycles. So, when they say a language dies, a culture dies, well, the language is alive and the culture is very much alive. Something else we have a lot of, surprisingly, and most people don't give the archaeology credit, is a lot of dates. We have a lot of radiometric dating from Rapa Nui from a whole variety of contexts. And they from different types of projects, so looking for different types of things. You'll see most of them have been taken in the last, we'll say, 30 years, when the science of radiometric dating and carbon-14 has been refined, and we really have some good ideas of the timing, and we have no dates that have ever come back before 400 CE. Now, most argue those dates are contaminated or there wasn't enough of them to make a proper timeline, but that's one of the debating points of the island, is trying to use good science to see what dates should be used to make the timeline. And you'll notice most of the dates before 2000 use a very similar model, as if it was copy and paste, maybe a little refinement here and there, but you'll see they used all of those early dates before we started things like radiometric hygiene, and we got rid of the outlier dates and dates that may have been in a marine context that may have shifted some of the dating. So now we look for short-lived species, usually from cooking context, in the lowest layer that we can get solid dates. And now most would argue the island was not colonized till after 1000 CE, and most likely closer to 1200 CE. And that matches the dating throughout Polynesia. It's around the same types of Hawaii and New Zealand and the expansion where Polynesian folks had already been. So although we are working on this model, you can tell from the earliest to now, there is refinement, and we're getting better at understanding when the phases actually happen. Now, one main debate that's still around is the idea of collapse or anti-collapse. Did the culture collapse before Europeans arrived, or is it after? And I'll try to talk about that with the time I have at the end of this presentation. But, spoiler alert, the Rapa Nui people didn't collapse. They're still alive today. They're still vibrant. And again, the idea of collapse as a term used by folks like Jared Diamond, they're synthesizers. They're not even he's not even an archaeologist. He's an ornithologist using our data to tell a story. And most of us would completely disagree with interpretations made, but I digress. For me, I sort of have my own timeline that I've created through my own dating regimes or with colleagues, or looking at other dates that I believe have the best precision and accuracy. We have the original colonization between 11 and 1200. That should say CE, excuse me, not BCE, CE. I got a B snuck in there, I apologize. Then the intense development from 12 to 1300 CE. The big megalithic phase from 1300 to 1722, when the island was colonized. The island still continues, but by 1867, we know that on the island, there's 110 people living on the island. There are other Rapa Nui living in Tahiti and in Mangareva, but on the island, it's dire straits. And that product is because of disease and blackbirding and slavery and just murder and abuse of the Rapa Nui population. But I think since that moment, and definitely we're seeing a real resurgence of Rapa Nui culture. Even to the bit you can visit in February for 2 weeks and enjoy Tapati, which means 1 week in Rapa Nui, but it's a festival of anywhere between 10 and 14 days where they bring to life the ancient culture, the songs, the dances, the food, and it shows this very vibrant lifestyle. For this chat, I just want to focus on 3 sections. And there's other lectures that I have on my channel that deal with other times, but those are the 3 I want to focus on, which is colonization, development, and you can really see a lot of that in a book we just published last year, which is in Spanish. We're working to get it to English. It's called the Rapa Nui Atlas, and it's a great book for children. We really focused on creating educational materials for the island's youth, and this was a book that we got funding through the Chilean sort of Arts Council, and this was with my co-author and Maria Huque Fuentes, who's a Rapa Nui teacher on the island, and Catalina, who is the exceptional artist for this. So if you're interested, hit me up in the DM or a chat, and I can give you a link if you'd like to know more info. Okay, so arrival of the Maohis, we use a variety of evidence to get an idea of when they arrive. There's a lot of oral tradition about the island's first chief, Hotumatua, who's said to come from an island called Hiva with him and his sister and his wives, and they arrived to the island. And we can look at oral traditions that talk about these events. We can count some of the genealogies that we can go back in time. But when we bring in the scientific dating, the most secure and precise and accurate dates are between 11 and 1200 CE or AD. So that basically up to contact, up to 1722, that would give more than 500 years of the Maohi culture to have time to develop, to grow, to build, and so forth. When Cook came to the island on one of his trips throughout the Pacific of the three, his artist, Hodges, drew what a Rapa Nui chief looked like with elongated ears for earplugs, the big hat with white feathers. And then this was the last sort of declared chief on the island, Ridoroko Tuki Valentino. And I tend to think that those two guys, if he had a hat on, these guys look pretty identical, which to me shows that continuation that chiefs were alive when the original navigators got there, the Europeans, and they're still alive till today. Now they have much more councils of elders. They have the traditional Rapa Nui clans. So they've found ways to reorganize themselves on the land and in the water. Now, the oral tradition says that the two ships that first come to Rapa Nui land right here at Anakena. There's another beach on the other side at Ovahe, and those are really the only two large sand beaches that would be perfect for colonization. This is what they look like up close. You'll see some volcanic domes located all over that sort of give some of the pink and iron sand. And then when it mixes with the ocean and it's sort of white coral, it gives you this really nice red beach that's perfect to sit down and for those that like to have a beer ski. Some of these trees, which were all planted in the 1960s, these are all palm trees that came from the island of Tahiti. You'll even see some agricultural fields. But this area, Hangarau, will become the center point of the culture. This would become the beach of the chiefs. And because Hotumatua, the first chief that lands here, this is going to become ground zero for the culture. And from here, everything will grow. And it's quite a beautiful beach on each side. Here you can see the very large Terivaca, which was one of the largest volcanoes on the island that had 60 other volcanic events related to the formulation of this island. Here you can see Nau Nau and Aturefuke, which are very famous restored platforms. This was one of the first moai that was restored by the islanders, and this was restored later in the 70s and 80s by the first Rapa Nui mayor, Sergio Rapu. Now, there's an interesting concept on Rapa Nui that you'll hear, which is mata. Mata can mean I. Mata can also mean clan. But to me, visibility is a very important part of Rapa Nui culture. It's much different than like Marquesas or Tahitis, where you have these huge, jagged hills, and it's very difficult to see one clan from another. On Rapa Nui, there's a lot of rolling hills. And from one area, you can almost see to the other side of the island. So you'd be able to see other groups and fires. Now, granted, if there's not a lot of trees, which we believe at one time Rapa Nui was completely forested with palm trees, but visibility is just super important. So here you can see the Rapa Nui people during a festival putting the eyes back in the moai. So the statues are called moai. The top knots are called pukau. They're sitting on the ahu, and that is the center of the Rapa Nui monumental culture. When all the eyes are in, it looks like this. And you can imagine if you were living somewhere with the moai looking at you, you'd feel safe. because these are your ancestors. These are the people that came before you. They're not looking out to the ocean. That movie Hop is horrible. They've got all the moai looking to the ocean. They're not worried about that. They're not worried about Captain Jack Sparrow pirates. No, they're looking inwards because that's where the mana's at. And that's where you look every day to your ancestors. So, where you establish your house, where you put your chicken house, where you put your gardens, you're going to be viewed by the ancestors. And this was super important. And from that, we know that eyes on the top, but they're built on many layers of platforms that have come before. So here's an excavation of now without the eyes in, and you'll notice multiple cultural horizons, different layers of this platform through time. So if they arrived at 1200, we'll say 11 to 1200, and people don't arrive from the outside world to sort of, tweak the system, that's 500 years of construction. And through there, they built on top of each other, layer by layer, plaza by plaza. And that's one good thing about doing the real archaeology is we have stratigraphic control. We take samples at each layer. We then analyze those samples, and that gives us part of our timelines. So you can see multiple layers here and probably multiple ahu that were being built. New chiefs come into position, new families gain power, then they build their platforms and add their chiefs accordingly. So it's a process. It wasn't, they say Rome wasn't built in a day. Well, a Rapa Nui platform wasn't built in a day. And it probably took generations to get the platforms where they're at now. Now, this system then, once we know Hotumatua, the first chief, when he's about to die, he sends his sons all around the island to different places to start their own platforms, to start their own tribes, to start their own mata. And as this culture grows and ebbs and flows for 500 years, it gets quite sociopolitically, ideologically, and economically advanced. We have two different types of chiefs. The main chief called Ariki Mau, secondary chiefs, Ariki Paka, Iviatua are seen as priests or maybe soothsayers. Tanata Honui are then individual chiefs from each clan. So what we're going to see is this upper class Ariki Mau and Ariki Paka, they're from the Miru tribe, Miru, very powerful tribe. They're the ones located on Anakena. They are the primogenitors. And then in each clan that we'll see in a second, they have their individual chiefs called Tanata Honui. We have Maori, which not like New Zealand Maori, but connected in a way through words, through cognates. These are your experts, your canoe makers, your stone tool makers. We have two classes of warriors on Rapa Nui, Matatoa, which is a higher class, and Paoa, which are probably more like guards, and then Hurumanu, and which are probably everyday workers. These are the farmers and those that are tending the gardens, and then you have Kio, which you can't really see, but that is called indentured, not a slave. It's not the term that I think is properly translated. It's more indentured servant, and perhaps sometimes after battles or after marriages, certain individuals would be exchanged, and depending on your rank and depending on where you fall between the first chief and then the ranking of the six sons and then all of the people underneath, there's a very high social stratification of this culture. Okay, so when they divide themselves, we can see that platforms then become their cultural downtown, right? And then certain territories start to get formed by using natural terrain, by using cairns, by using petroglyphs, caves, and this system starts to fall out, which is very similar to what we see in Hawaii with the Ahupua'a, where you have access to the ocean and a slice like a pie going to the center. On the top of the culture, on the top of the island, you have more of the upper class, and then on the lower side, you have lower class clans. So again, you have this very socially complex system. And usually with these complex systems, you have ways to organize labor, organize resources, and be able to build as many archaeological remains that we have on this island. And as the latest tallies come in, it's more than 20,000 archaeological features on Rapa Nui. And some have even pushed that up to 26,000. So it is a very archaeologically rich place. So we have archaeological divisions, ethnohistoric divisions that were, this was a, if this map was made by archaeologists analyzing the platforms and the layouts, this was organized by the islanders themselves using genealogies and oral traditions. And this is how they organized their island. When Catherine Rutledge was there in 1914 and 15, she also did an analysis of the territories. And you're going to notice all three of these are different. And it sort of makes sense because we can imagine in the United States how our state boundaries have changed in 200 years, in 100 years of everything being formed. Well, Rapa Nui was a living culture, and there was ebbs and flows of powers and chiefs and local chiefs, and probably skirmishes and conflicts. And these territories probably moved in and moved out through times. So when we look at the different maps, it's not saying that they're all wrong. Which one do you pick? What it's probably representing is the changes of political entities through time. But what centers all of this territory are the platforms, the ahu. These are megalithic structures. There's about 314 of them found throughout the island. Some of them are made to house platforms. Some of them are for burial context. Some of them are to demarc territory. There's a variety of purposes, very similar to mounds in the United States that have a variety of purposes. But the main one were the image ahu, as they're called, and those were made to put the moai up on a platform. Now, in the center there, we'll talk about Rano Raraku in a little bit, the main quarry where the statues were carved. But everywhere you go around the island, there is this similar need to build a center platform, to build a moai on top, and then at times with the pukao. So just because they share all of this sort of transmission, you can tell they came from a similar seed. And most of the moai, as we'll talk about, are all carved from the same material, the hats from the same material. They're using a centralized place that all clans are getting access to or trading that material for. And that's going to be an important point later on. It's really something to see the restored sites that are around the island. But if you go to a place like Vaihu that still have their statues pushed down. Now, questions are asked, did the Rapa Nui people push the statues down? Yes. Did some of the statues get pushed over by tsunamis? Probably. Did some of the statues just break down through time because they've been sitting there for maybe 600, 700, 800 years? Yes. And that entropy has done its damage. So there is a variety of reasons why statues are pushed down, but there's a handful that have been restored, especially like Tongariki, that at one time had 32 moai in its area, and it was restored after a very large tsunami that came from Chile. Now, here are your moais. In general, they're made from this center material here, which is Toba lapilli. It's just a volcanic ash. It has a lot of different inclusions, but the Rapa Nui people did try to carve out of basalt and scoria and tractite. So they were experimenting, but they end up loving the material that came from Rano Raraku. It was a very good material to work from. And we see a progression then through time where some of the first statues seem to have more connection to the other islands in the Pacific, like Pitcairn, like Tahiti, where they're a little more naturalistic, a little bit smaller. They have things like rounded heads and more bodies. But as time goes on, they start to get elongated and stylized and bigger. And that's just, I think, a natural product of them getting better at carving and having more organization and having more specialists supported by the chiefly class. And in there, you can see that some of these moai are The largest one on the island is about 21 meters, almost 22 meters. So we'll say 66 feet. And some of the littlest moai I've seen are no bigger than 5 inches, 6 inches, that are carved in the stone that look like maybe they were teaching children or they were practicing what the layout was going to be. So we see a variety of sizes. Now, they're distributed all over the island. There's more than 1,000 that were attempted to be carved. And you'll notice the ones that are standing are the ones that are restored. You'll also notice the huge concentration of them still in the main quarry of Rano Raraku. There's almost 400 that are still there. We'll see others that are on what's called the moai roads. But of all the statues that were carved, only 288 of them seem to be made it to their platform and were raised up and have the eyes carved out, the Eringa Ora. So if we have 1,000 moai and 288 were successful, that means the Rapa Nui people were only successful maybe 29% of the time. To me, that's very human, right? These errors, you can look throughout the world to see carving errors and learning in action. And if this really was an alien culture with laser beams, dude, they sucked at burning statues. They weren't really good. To me, if you have these perfect beings that can go across space, you'd think they'd be able to cut and teleport statues without a problem. No, actually, humans will make much more errors, and only 30%, almost 30% were actually successful. And I always keep that in my mind about, you know, that's more of a human sort of human amount. If you're a baseball player, you want to get 300, your average is 300, you're good to go. Well, Rapa Nui people were not bad with their average at 288. Okay. So this is the main quarry. This is the a volcano that is known as Maunga Io, the sweet smelling volcano, and the idea perhaps it had flowers and it was an ecosystem on its own. And then later, Rapa Nui people started to plant on the inside because it's one of three freshwater craters that we have on the island. Here on this bit, you're going to see this is Maunga Io right here, and here's all the statues. You can start to see terracing and what looks like areas that have been removed from there. And this is a very important bit to start to see these statues and all of their different forms through time. Um, this is the flank, the outer flank of Maunga Io. And what we identify is sort of three general areas. One is the carving area, where they're actually going into the tuft and removing statues. One is the detail area, where they start to make holes and then move the statues down these ramps. See all these ramps here? That was what's ultimately burying the moai. It's not that they've been there for millions of years and now they're getting buried in sand. No, wrong. It's because they're right on the end of gravitation, and all of these particles that were chopped, the debitage of the process, the leftover of making the moai, is starting to roll into all these holes and slowly starting to tap up these moai. So carving area, detail area, and then out here we have the transport area. Once a statue is ready to go and move out in there. And you'll see a variety of moai stacked up here. So every place you start to see, we call these micro quarries, especially where you have sort of this white leaching of minerals coming on out. But there's two that I want to highlight. One is this guy right here. That's a human being. This is the largest moai that was ever attempted. Te Totonga, El Gigante, the giant. He's almost at 22 meters, almost 66 feet. This oral tradition tells us was the first statue that they tried to carve out as a block, move the block down, and then carve the moai, and they failed by making the head almost half of the body. So what they end up doing is carving the entire body on the inside and then moving it down the ramps into the detail area and outwards. They also carved inside the quarry. So this is inside. This is what's called Rano Raraku. The Rano is sort of a freshwater crater, and Raraku because that means it's scraped or it's dented. And here we have another 100 moai that were on the inside, also trying to find those nice lenses of the best topolapally that they could use to get these moai out. They would work them around to basically the south side, and then they opened up an area that they can move the moai from there. One of the things we try to do is create educational materials for children, and this is from our book that's made by another Rapa Nui artist that I work with, Veri Lobos Hawa. This was in 2022, right during COVID. And we knew we wanted to create something that children could color and learn about their quarries and learn about their ancestors' quarries. So we typically had Veri use digital art to recreate a scene with different specialists and overseers. We had a page in black and white that the students could carve. And then we had the book in 3 languages, English, Spanish, and Rapa Nui, that parents could then read to their kids, or they can read the easy things. And in the back, we had a complete site description. And this was through another grant or it's a fund art from the Chilean Arts and Culture Ministry. So this was another book. If you're interested, hit me up and I can give you a link of where you can pick that up. Great gift coming up for the kids. I guess one of the main points here is what we're seeing in the quarry is evidence of human work, not aliens. I hate that I have to say these things. Like, it drives me absolutely nuts. What, gotta put my hair up here. What if these moai are representing the ancient? No, stop. Please stop. Because right there, you're not using the simple power of observation or experiment. So one of the studies that Tor Heyerdahl did do after his work to Kontiki and crash landing in the Tuamotus, he then brought an expedition to Rapa Nui, which really started the scientific work. And one of the important things there is he bought Dr. William Malloy, who then would really take over Easter Island study and help restore some of the first platforms, get money, and then start a whole generations of scholars. But if you'll notice on the top picture there, Heyerdahl wanted a team of Rapa Nui men, gave them a week, only with traditional toki. You can see some of the toki here, the stone tools that are just like picks. And he said, let's see what you can carve in a week. And basically, within 1 week, 8 hours a day, they carved almost 20% of one side of a statue. They made the outline, they carved everything from the forehead to the nose to the ears, and most of them were not even tired afterwards. So the point with this is, it really wasn't that hard to carve statues and to form them. If you had proper stone that didn't break and you found a good bed within that stone, you were set. What seems to be more difficult was transport, which I'll talk about. Now, inside the quarry, we've identified a variety of micro quarries. And our hypothesis is because there were multiple clans, most likely the carvers of each clan have their own nook and cranny, or the clan that sort of had a little more control over the quarry designated where people were able to carve from as they were exchanging perhaps that material. So we can see moai in a variety of forms, from almost just starting to almost finished. And that really helps because we can then take those photos from the micro quarries and start to see the process of carving. It's quite easy to see, but sure, it's going to be overwhelming when you think, how are they going to carve something this large that's 66 feet long? Well, people have been carving larger things like that thousands of years before, and it's not an issue. If you're well organized, if your labor pool is fed, if they're cared for, if they're economically sanctioned and ideologically pampered and sociopolitically rewarded, people will want to work. You're carving your ancestors. You're highlighting their strength. Why wouldn't you want to do that? These aren't slaves. These are individuals that wanted to be there. This was a way that they could honor their ancestors forever. So a lot of evidence in these micro quarries help us paint a picture of what actually happened. And we can see multiple moai that once they started that outline and worked from the nose to the ears to the back, they usually created a keel. And that keel would basically hold that moai to the parent rock. Now, I think that would be a little scary to be hanging out underneath that statue, but it was done to the point that we even see holes that were made in each of the underneath these platforms as they're getting ready to knock out that bit of the keel and send like a boat into the water. Now, on the top of Rano Raraku, on this bit right up here, there's a place called Pumakari. And Pumakari is interesting because it has all of these hollowed out holes. It has a tunneling system in the inside. And the idea here is this is some type of harness or pulley system that they're using the rope that they could create from how, which if you remember the movie Castaway with Tom Hanks, when he's peeling all of those plants, that's how. And then he's braiding them together. Well, in Rapa Nui, they were even smarter. They started to use human hair inside their rope to make it more tensile strength. So you can run rope all the way from the top using big, large tree trunks on the inside of these holes, running your rope, and then as you tie off your moai around the neck, which is the weakest part, that's why we see a lot of moai broke at the neck, they can then slowly move that moai down into those prepared holes. So they go from the carving area into the detail area. And we can see the pick marks that were actually used to clear out these holes to slide the moai in. And here they would do the detail. They would cut out the keel, they would work the ears, they would get the face and everything but the belly. The belly they would leave fat. And the reason they use the belly flat is because, as we'll see, that was one thing helping them move the moai forward. And I'll talk about that. Here's one of the most famous moai that was carved, I think, one of the largest that never made it to a platform that was pretty much ready to go, Moai Hiave. Here you can see Tor Heyerdahl with his crew. And here you can just see how much that erosion is being weirded off by the moai in the ground still. So when people say, why don't they dig up all the moai? Well, that environment breaks down the moai quite quickly with the salt, the rain, the bird poop, the lichens. There's a lot of effect. Global change, climate change, all of these are putting a lot of effect on the statues. But here you can really start to see how large some of these statues were. You can see a little moai hiding back here who was probably being slid into a hole, and he's sort of on the tarmac of O'Hare waiting to be launched, but he never made it. Now, something to help move the statues was called the moai roads, te ara o te moai. And these are found all throughout, radiating from Rano Raraku. They've been documented even from Catlin Rutledge's time, 1914-15, her book published in 1919, and then even recent studies using satellites and LIDAR to basically see the divots of how these moai were being made off, and then seeing moai located, broken moai on this path. Now, some have argued some of the moai found on the trail may have been barriers or territorial markers, but for the most part, these were helping to move the statues out. Now, the most common question that I can answer, how did they move the statues? And I'm going to be honest and tell you, I don't know. After all these years, I don't know. But that's not a bad thing, because honestly, in my mind, I know they moved them. I know they could move them. I know they could have moved them. But this has generated so much debate about how exactly they were moved. Some believe that it was a multiplicity of techniques. Some feel it was only one or two. Oral tradition tells us that the moai, the mana, the energy of the chief, he moved the statue by his mana. Now, for us, we start thinking about magic use and them teleporting the moai, but mana in this case is representing the socio-political power, the economic support, the ideological prestige. That's the mana the chiefs use to move the statues. But it's easier to believe that aliens did it because that's sensational. And because TV shows make money on that, obviously the moai were moved by aliens. Obviously, come on. Others have been more practical about using sleds with rollers or having frames or being rocked by the neck or dragged. There is a multiplicity of techniques because the island is not always flat. The Moai roads did help to flatten areas, but there are some places you got to go over a volcano. You got to go around a bend. What did they do there? And they probably had to change their orientation to move that moai in that micro geography of the time. Also, there was probably wooden structures that don't exist today that also help them lever them down and move them out. But they most likely used a variety of stone, of earth, and this helped them transport the moais throughout the island. The most recent hypothesis, which is a good one, this is work from Terry Hunt and Carl Lippo, two Rapa Nui experts. This is in Hawaii, and they wanted to show that you wouldn't need a lot of people to move a 4-ton moai. In fact, all you really need is some good rope and good organization. You have a team on the back that ties the rope off that lets the moai lean forward. You have your two teams on each side that start rocking the moai. Remember the big belly that you leave from the quarry, and this sort of acts as a shovel as it slowly dances its way. And there's a very cool video on YouTube. I didn't want to mix things up. You can look at it here, but just look at Nat Geo Moving Giants, and you can see how this statue was moved. But notice, this is very flat land. Can you move a moai on the other side of the island that has a hill? Probably not. You'd have to have another technique to do so. Now, you have the issue then, what happens when you get to the platform? How do you raise the statue from there? And this is another, sort of engineering, architectural feat that, again, we didn't give Rapa Nui people credit to do. But sure enough, if you said, how do you do it? They'll show you. Just ask them. They have the oral tradition. And this is a Turehuke. This is also an Anakena, the Beach of the Kings. And here, Heyerdahl wanted to be shown how it was done. And sure enough, they have planks, they have ropes and stone, the same thing that they would have in the past. They put the stone underneath the lever. They raise the moai up a little bit, slide under a stone, raise it up a little more, slide under a stone. You basically keep doing that with all of these stones to get it to a level that it starts to rock. You put a back stone to catch it. You let it slowly fall into place. And then all of those stones that you have that you just use, you use them to create the ahu or to further the ahu or to make the wings. So they were always recycling and reusing, bringing moai in, taking moai off. It was a living statue. It was a living platform. Now we just see it. You don't get to see how alive they were. These statues were probably painted and had feathers and hats and regalia and tattoos. And now they are in their, withering phase as slowly but surely the toba is breaking down through time. So here's my last little bit. Why do people think that the Rapa Nui were not able to carve, move, and install moai? My answer is right there. Is because it's easier to believe something like this than human beings, right? It's easier to believe that these statues, because how many TV shows from Ancient Aliens to Unearthed to Graham Hancock to all of these individual Chariots of the Gods, all of these folks that really never put the time in to actually talk to the Rapa Nui, to live there, to learn the language, to do the work themselves. They just pick and choose. And because humans at times would rather watch a TV show than read a book or do the work themselves, this is the interpretation. But sadly, there's something more sinister. And this is something we've reflected on a lot on the island, is that Basically, because the Rapa Nui people are brown. There's a little bit of racism and ethnocentrism when it comes down to some of these shows and how they believe some groups can be builders and others cannot. And the traditional story is, how do these Rapa Nui people with feathers in their ear, how could they even build these statues? It's impossible. It had to be another culture that taught them. It had to be aliens that came in and gave them the technology. This is very dangerous. It doesn't give the proper credit to the people who built these statues and moved them and transported them. That's why most of us and this real archaeology, we're also combating racism and ethnocentrism and not giving, proper credit and defunking false narratives about the past. And that's why I think some of us are just, we're over it, because we are the experts. We've been to these places for years, decades, and we're trying to get our message out on things like, real archaeology. So then, how is this possible, Dale? Okay, the great story. How is this organization possible? How is it able to, all of these groups come together, right? And all of these leaders and the food. How does it all happen, Dale? And that's what I want to get into my last little bit here. My argument is that for 500 years and without outside contact, pre-contact Rapa Nui was sociopolitically, economically, and ideologically controlled by elite Rapa Nui, including chiefs, priests, and experts. This is the base. And it's this isolation and efficiency or efficient management which allowed for the achievement that this island is so famous for. This is a human endeavor. This is a place that's at times an unpredictable island. It's not tropical, it's subtropical. There's no barrier reef, there's not a lot of coral. There's only about 300 fish species, which is a lot by a lot of our standards, but compared to other Polynesian islands, it's very minimum. These individuals were able to create a culture that was balanced, that although they are building and transporting, they have a good idea of their population, of how much they can produce, about when animals are coming out. These are individuals that were ready for this challenge. And most of us would argue that up to 1722, the system was fine and it was in place. Yes, they're not as constructing as many statues, but they're building out their ahu. They're specializing in other activities. But the way that the culture has changed, just like all cultures. But once those Europeans finally get there, we see a real issue. And I think it's with that issue that definitely changes the culture forever. And by the late 1800s, we have those 110 people living on Rapa Nui, and that's what people sort of identify the island culture by. And I think that it's quite sad. We need to see the overall story. We don't just want to time slice the bad time and then say that's how it was the entire time. Instead, if we look at the overall culture, we'll see something just a little bit different. Okay. One of the main factors that help the island sort of collaborate a little bit better is that inside each clan zone, they didn't have all the necessary stone to build all the platforms, to build the moai, to make the top knots, the hats, to get obsidian and basalt. So it's really interesting that although moai are found all throughout the island, they only come from one place. 95% of all the moai come from one place, but they're found in every corner of the island. The pukao, they come from one source, Puno Pao, but they're found throughout the island. Obsidian, 70% of all the obsidian found throughout the island comes from one source, Maungo Rito. And my PhD showed that the majority of basalt that was being used was coming from one small area called Putoki Toki and Ruatoki Toki here. So what we have is this microeconomy inside the island that these chiefs most likely had to barter and work together to exchange these materials of stone. So, in other words, stone brought people together, right? But they also had to exchange other things: crops, fish, females, maybe stories, workers, and so forth. But one of the limiting factors is that the stone, so important, not one clan has everything that they need in their territory. Okay. Something else that's interesting then is when we look at the settlement pattern of what can be seen and not seen from a platform. My MA showed that almost 80% of the time, anything that's within the settlement pattern is always within visibility of the platform. And this is crucial, this idea of the mata, the elite, keeping an eye on the people, keeping an eye on the productive resources. So not only do you have the most powerful ancestors looking, but you have the elite in the middle. The elite have the best view of the ancestors, and they also can oversee people farther inland that maybe not have as much rank. And you can imagine this type of control, this panoptic, every day that you go out in the field, you want to eat something, a sweet potato, a chicken, and you're going to grab it out of that hut. You better make sure you got permission not only from the living elite, but the ancestors. Are you having proper ceremony? Are you offering enough? Are you giving away enough to have this resource? So this was a way that the elites could keep an eye on the prize, an eye on their productive resources, along perhaps with other type of stone quarries and things that they would have in their areas. So for us, we live in a panoptic. I like to believe, and I've said this in other places, that the moai could have acted as one of our first CCTVs. It was a first camera. It was a way to influence behavior. And if you see certain cameras in today's day and age, you act differently. Whether you're driving, whether you're at a store, whether you're at school, your behavior changes once you know you're being looked at. And I really believe that once people knew the ancestors with those big eyes were watching them and the elites were watching them, that changed behavior. That helped keep that hierarchy in place. From there, once they have this elite visual scape, these chiefly visual scapes, it helps them control the land of the area, fresh water. They have things called puna, which are wells that fill up with water, and they're able to control access points to the ocean. And this is another way that chiefs can move themselves and people through the canoes, get to different fishing spots throughout the island, and then have this sort of central downtown that's able to control economy, ideology, and socio-political organization. But in inland areas, this sort of landscape is also controlling food, the productive resources. And we know from oral traditions and stories from the first navigators that farm fields were clearly identified between clans. And therefore, a chief would keep an eye on those workers in those farm fields. And sometimes fields were plantations. Sometimes they were things called manavai, which are rock gardens that could be above and below ground. Sometimes there's rock mulching called pu, and this is very important for root crops, things that grow into the ground. And this pu, these sort of rock mulch areas are crucial because they can keep the temperature up when it's cold. They can retain moisture. They perhaps can add some nutrients to the ground. And this was a very innovative way for the Rapa Nui to produce their food on an island that at times doesn't have as much rain, has unpredictable sort of heat and cold. But what I like with the chicken homes, the chicken houses, the hare moa, hare umu is it's a house oven. That's a hare moa. What we see sometimes in the record is that actually elite skulls called puoko moa were actually put in certain chicken houses. And this would create a definite link between that elite individual and that chicken house. Because the dog and pig, they don't make it to Rapa Nui. It's just the chicken. And because of that, the chicken becomes so important for everyday life. The feathers, the eggs, the meat, the bones. So you can imagine then that if I was an elite individual, I want to make sure who gets chicken out of that are people that are deserving, or it's for a certain festival, or I'm going to use it for my own means. So here you can have chiefs that are gaining material resources that they can use for their own agendas, like building a new platform, commemorating a new moai. So these things start to work together. Um, then we see these chiefs then that are also redistributing certain materials amongst themselves, and they're able to eat certain materials. So some of the big vacas, the boats, the deep sea boats, that was only used by the most upper class miru, and they were the ones that were able to get things like tuna fish and probably dolphins and seals and things that would be a very elite crop. But the chief then could use that tuna and pass it out to lower individuals. And then they could pass to other people. So it's that down the line exchange. But we also know there are some rock types, while the majority of stone is used communally on the island, there are some pockets, there are some patchy places on the island that my PhD found that were only in elite context. And that makes sense because the elite also have their own needs. They're not going to want to manage every single quarry on Easter Island, but they're going to manage a few of them, which includes both basalt and obsidian. So they're able to also control some of those redistribution centers, especially after cropping and after harvesting. You have something called a first fruit ceremony. In Polynesia, it's very common, where as soon as those first fruits start to come out, the elite appropriate those, they redistribute amongst their retainers and their people, but they then can also use a surplus to have parties. And there's two main parties on Rapa Nui. One is the hatu that you do for your people, and then one is a koro that you do for the island, and you invite other people over. And in those moments when you have the whole island together, it's here where you can exchange marriage partners, ideas, stone, resources. And that's what's bringing the people together. These chiefs, their parties, their access to surplus through things like first fruit ceremonies. Very, very important. And then last but not least, a really interesting bit of elite control and a communication on the island was through their very famous rongo boards. Some have argued that this could have been an indigenous system of writing to join the Egyptians with, hieroglyphics, or cuneiform in Mesopotamia, or the short and long count and the stelae of the Mayan. Perhaps the Rapa Nui were ready to make a language system. Um, it seems it fits what language is used for elite individuals to maintain sacred genealogies and stories of the elite. And because of that, they give themselves more power because they're able to read these symbols of rongo, where others maybe not. They just can listen. They're part of the team, but they don't understand the lyrics. And I think that this was another way. Now, there's about 28 tablets that exist in the world of rongo. Sadly, none of them exist on the island, the originals. They all have been moved to different places and museums through collectors. But I think that this is a real showing. And, if writing would have happened on Rapa Nui, it would have just been one more thing to show just how socially, and economically and ideologically advanced they were for a culture almost in the middle of nowhere. So, if I could button this up with one sentence, how did they do all this? Adaptation, organization, and tradition carved, transported, and installed the moai. You don't need aliens. You don't need laser beams. You don't need lost continents of Mu or ice age civilizations. They had everything that they needed coming through the Pacific and landing on Rapa Nui. My last bit, I think I have 3, 4 slides. This is a common question that's at the heart of a lot of our research at the moment is, did the Rapa Nui culture collapse? Okay. Now, some say soon as the Europeans came, the culture had already collapsed and it was over. We have found that by having rigorous studies of captain logs and sketches and reports from the first navigators that the island looks to be fine. They're building houses, they're building gardens, they have layers of chiefs, some have hats, they have individuals that are leading groups, they have individuals that move the navigators and explorers through the island, through the different clan lines. It seems like the system is in place. One of the interesting things about Rapa Nui is for 522 years, they were able to know everything. They knew the cycles, they knew the moon, they knew when the birds were going to come. But one thing that they couldn't identify is when the Europeans would come. And we'll see after 1722, all the way through the 1800s, where finally the whalers and kidnappers get there, that's really the dark time. So if Rapa Nui really collapsed, it's post contact with the introduction of diseases and changes in social ways, and the admixture of other genetic material on the island. So this idea that Rapa Nui collapsed is more to sell books than it is to tell the real story. Because let me tell you, they're alive and well. They're 8,000 strong, and they're doing well. And if I can leave you with two pictures from the early navigators, one of the stories of collapse is that they, after a revolt, and the little ears pushed over the big ears statues, and they cut down the last tree that was shown in Kevin Costner's Rapa Nui movie, all the moai were pushed down. Well, if you actually look and go into the record and do the work, you would find that both La Perouse in 1876 and Hodges in 1776 draw pictures with moai still standing. And Hodges, who's theirs earlier than La Perouse, he's got multiple moai still standing, right? So what I want you to think about, and I'll perhaps make another video, is this is really a collapse narrative. And I have multiple publications about this, but what I want you to really see Rapa Nui as is an adaptive culture, well organized and based on tradition. And because of that, they were living in a system that was working, and they were able to adapt. Now, of course, did they have environmental change that they had to contend with? Absolutely. We know that it changes from the medieval warming period to the Little Ice Age. There's global effects that hit them. There's changes in El Nino and El Nino and La Nina that puts changes on them. They probably had changes in the rats that were brought to the island that were destroying some of the palms and the birds. But we see them also being resilient by planting palm trees, by looking to new resources, by changing cultural systems to fit the times. So if Rapa Nui is anything, it's a lesson for us in adaptation, organization, and tradition. And I hope that lesson and that story came out today. So I hope you enjoy the rest of the Real Archaeology Day. Please come back to the channel for future episodes and rants that I have about archaeology. And I really appreciated that you came out today and checked out Illinois Simpson Archaeology. So enjoy everything out there, and remember, the best thing that you can do in the present for the future is learn about the past. All right, everyone, take care. Have a good one. Bye-bye.